M goes to M to just M. I1 went up to I. Now we have 2 points, and we can connect these 2 points, and we get again a downward sloping money demand function. And now if we consider a change in income, so if income goes up, holding everything else but essentially the normal interest rate constant, right, we're going to need more money. Our money demand is going to increase, so there's going to be a shift in money demand to the right. Yeah? Okay. So to close the money market, we're going to have a central bank, a government authority, that's going to determine the supply of money. Right, so let's think here, we're going to think of money just being synonymous with cash. Right, but we're going to get into banks and financial markets a little bit later. And if you think in terms of unconventional monetary policy, so a lot of what happened in world economies during and after the financial crisis, we had central banks buying bonds, supplying banks with additional credit. We can think of this in general as central banks providing liquidity. So just think of money here intuitively synonymous with cash. When we think of an economy, think of it in general just as synonymous with liquidity. All right, so we have equilibrium when supply equals demand. We have our demand function, and we're going to fix supply. All right, so in the end, what this tells us is if we demand more money or demand less money than there is, it doesn't help us. The government tells us how much money there is. Right? They set the money supply. Right? So something has to adjust so that we're in equilibrium, and that's going to be the interest rate. Right? If the interest rate were higher, right, then the government is supplying more money than we want to hold. Right? Which means that there's an excess. I think it's intuitive, it's better the other way around. So let's start, if we have interest rate is lower than I, we would have excess demand. So we want to hold more money, right, at this interest rate than the government supplies. So what happens? Well, I have some extra money in my pocket because I didn't spend it all at lunch, and remember I told you I had some money just in case I wanted to have coffee, and I have money maybe for the whole week to eat. So I'm doing some precautionary motive. Now, if you were to offer me a higher interest rate, then maybe, right, I wouldn't have taken all this money out. Maybe I would put some of the money back in the bank. So the idea is when the interest rate goes up, this is going to incentivize some people who are holding extra cash for precautionary or just in case or potential transactions to reduce their money holdings. They're going to then take advantage of the higher interest rate. And that's going to, the interest rate is going to keep rising. We're going to keep reducing these excess money demand holdings, right, until everyone who wants to hold money can hold money at this interest rate. All right, so we think now about like a change in income. All right, we get then this intuition is even more useful. Yeah, exactly. So let's say, right, there's a change in income. We're all wealthier. We're producing more. We're buying more. We're selling more. There's been tremendous growth. Right? Everyone wants to have a new motorbike. Everyone wants to get a new cell phone. We're all buying new things. Right? That's a good thing for the economy. Right? We're growing. We're becoming wealthier, better off. Right? Well, what does that mean? If the government, right, this means more transactions, we need more money to facilitate these transactions. I need more cash to buy all these things. Right? So if the government doesn't increase the money supply, what needs to happen is, well, I need more cash to buy the cell phone. Someone else, I have to get this cash from somebody else. Right? How am I going to get this cash from somebody else? Well, if they can earn a higher interest rate, if they have extra cash, right, on the margin, people who are holding money for maybe precautionary reasons or just in case, right, to buy that cafe sua, will now be enticed to leave that money in the bank, which means that money is now available for me to buy that new motorbike or that new cell phone. Right, so what essentially needs to happen is as transactions go up, transaction demands goes up, our money demand goes up. If the money supply doesn't go up along with it, the economy has to find a way to direct money that's otherwise lying around, not being used for transactions, towards facilitating these transactions. And how we do that, how it does that is by increasing the interest rate. The interest rate is the price of money. It's the cost of holding the money. It's the opportunity cost. When I have cash in my pocket, I could otherwise be earning interest. And so I'm paying the price by losing out on this interest while holding cash in my pocket. And at maybe 2%, this doesn't matter to me, but just crank it up. If that interest rate goes up to 100% per day, we're all going to do whatever we can to put our cash to earn that interest. Right? And so what that means is somewhere in the interim, there's some interest rate that some people will decide to start saving some or some more of their cash and putting more of their cash in the bank. Right? And so then in total, we're going to have more cash and we'll be able to facilitate this increased amount of transactions. All right, what happens if ceteris paribus, the government increases the money supply here? Well, we can think in the long run that that's just going to increase the price level, but in the short run, we're not changing the price level. What has to change is then the price of money. Maybe let's have more money, so it's going to cost less. Right? The price of money goes down. Right? How does this work mechanically? Well, at this higher interest rate, we have to people wouldn't be willing to hold this higher amount of money at this higher interest rate. With this higher interest rate, people want to take advantage of this investment opportunity. So the only reason we can entice people to hold more money is if their alternative, right, what they could otherwise be earning with this money, right, by paying it into bonds, pays less. Right? So again, think of the interest rate being 100% every night. I don't want to hold on to any extra cash. Right? I want to lower my money holdings, my money demand goes as low as possibly can, to take advantage of this high interest rate. And as this interest rate goes down, right, then I don't know, maybe it's worth losing a little bit of interest to have money just in case I want to get a coffee after the election, which means I'm holding more money. And if the interest rate goes down to zero, right, that's a liquidity trap. Think also the financial crisis. This is a problem we're facing. If the interest rate goes down to zero, well, then there is no opportunity cost of holding money. Right? There's the alternative. So if I buy a government bond, it pays zero. If I hold it in cash, it pays zero. If I go to the canteen, I can pay with cash. I can't pay with a government bond. Why would I'll just hold everything in terms of cash? But you could think of infinite or money holdings equal to our entire potential. Right, so we have this demand for money depends on the transaction volume, and it's related inversely to the interest rate. That's the opportunity cost of holding money. All right, so that's a good example to start off with and think about. Does this hold up? Right here, this is the picture. Some of the pictures were from Germany, in the German version of the textbook, so I only had the German picture. I couldn't translate these. I went through and translated everything else. Here we have the interest rate, and this is this the liquidity coefficient. That's this L. I'm sorry, this LI term. And right, what we would expect to see is a negative relationship. And we see, I don't know, right, the interest rate is, there's a downward trend. The interest rates, time of 70s, and an increase. Right? So we do see an interest rate in this cash holding coefficient, this liquidity term L, moving in opposite directions. I mean, it's not, you know, I'm blessed by the fact that I have glasses. A lot of people don't have glasses. What does that mean? If I take my glasses off, I don't see the details. So it's kind of like a natural OLS regressor, right? And all I see is the black is going up and the red is going down. Yeah? So that's that negative relationship. Right here we can do a scatter plot. It's the same. It's the change in interest rate and the change in, because you have, think of here, interest rate went down, went up, went down. Right? Do we see that the change is moving in the same direction? Right? And there's, I mean, it's not the most convincing relationship, but it's there. Right? It's not rejected by the data. You know, this cash holding coefficient, right, it's been going up in Germany, it stopped right around the financial crisis, but it had been going down in the United States until the financial crisis. There's been a lot of, you could maybe say then, excess investment in the United States. Right? This might be evidence pointing the financial crisis that began in the United States as a mortgage crisis, housing crisis, and overinvestment in housing there. Right? If you think of, so why did you think there was an overinvestment in housing in the United States? Well, so what people were doing was I could take out a mortgage, borrow money from the bank to buy a house. Right? Now, even if I didn't have a lot of money, a lot of resources, a lot of collateral, if the banks and everyone else thought the value of the house was going to go up over time, then it's a good investment. I would borrow money from the bank, the value of the house would go up. So the equity, so I would borrow, let's say, $100,000 for the $100,000 house. And if the price of the house doubles to $200,000, then for the bank it's a good deal, right? They're going to get their money paid back with interest, and they have the house as collateral, which has gone up in value. And I see, without having any money to start with, I borrowed money from the bank, and now I have to pay the bank back $100,000 plus interest, so maybe $110,000, and I've made $90,000 then in the increase of my financial position by buying this house. Okay, so lots of people with they call them ninja mortgages, right? Ninja, but it was no income, no job. So people, the banks were giving people in America hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy a house when they had no income and no job. Right? So the banks were completely betting on the value of the house going up. There's no possibility for these people, or no perspective for these people to pay back the mortgage on their own. All right, well, if I can make $90,000 if I buy one house, the bank doesn't care about my income. Why don't I buy two houses, right? That's then $180,000. Oh, okay, fantastic, right? Right, and that's fine. I mean, you know, because if I buy a couple of houses and some people, maybe someone will rent one of the houses from me, then I'll have rental income. Now, what happens if everybody in the economy buys more than one house? Is there anybody left to rent these extra houses? No. What do these houses do? Nothing. How can their value double? It can't, right? So we have maybe an excess of investment here. Now the question is, where is this money coming from? Right? So for one person, that's fine, but think of the aggregate. How was America able to finance more houses than it has people? Right? I'm exaggerating a little bit. No, a lot of this, and we'll see this in the open economy, there was, America had a net deficit, or it was a net importer, which also meant that they were also net importers of credit. No? So you had lots of countries from abroad, the banks from Germany, for example, who are financing Americans buying homes in America. Implicitly, indirectly, perhaps, then China buying, or Japan, still the largest holder of U.S. government bonds, was then indirectly financing then Americans with no income and no jobs buying houses, right? Yeah. But so here we see at least evidence that there is this, this keeps going down, holding less and less cash, this overinvestment, right? It's changed course a little bit, but you see there's a big difference. The financial crisis in Germany, the Germans responded very, very strongly and held more cash. The Germans got out of investments. They're like, that's scary, financial crisis. Okay, so how does the government, how does the central bank change the money supply? And what happens when it does? Right, so there's one way we can think of doing this, the way it's done is through repurchase agreements. Right, so you might have the government buys securities from banks, right? Or doesn't buy them, but enters into or borrows them, right? So give me $100 million of bonds for 2 weeks, and I will give you $100 million for these bonds, and in 2 weeks I'll give you the bonds back, and you only have to pay me back $98 million. I've increased the money supply by $2 million by this repurchase agreement, or this short-term loaning back and forth of these bonds. We've seen unconventional monetary policy, outright purchases. That's why you see the word in the ECB and a lot of these unconventional monetary policies, the word outright, which means they directly buy government bonds or directly buy, purchase these securities or stocks and the like. Whereas before, standard monetary policy is an engagement in the markets where they offer up, let me loan you, I'm going to loan you 100 million euros for 2 weeks, and you'll only have to pay me back 98 million euros, but to participate, you have to give me a security, right, to secure this loan. And then we could also set this up that there are different ways to do this. We could offer 100 million, and banks could on auction, right? I'll pay you back 97. No, I'll pay you back 98. No, I'll pay you back 99. Right? And the bank that offers to pay back the most then gets the 100 million. So now we've increased the money supply only by 1%, but we've also, banks have set the nominal interest rate, right, through this auction. Right? We have a 1% over 2 weeks. So it turns out it's a very, very high interest rate, right, on an annual basis. But just conception to think how that works. Yeah.
So central banks have many ways to increase the money supply, like through short term and long term, like bond, any kind of asset.
Yeah. So it's different from country to country. It's changed over time. So up until the financial crisis, the usual way that it was done by the ECB and the United States was through short term, so 2-week periods where they would loan money to banks in exchange for securities for this 2-week period, and the banks would pay back less than the amount, and that's how they would increase the money supply. Right? And there would be a strict set of securities that would qualify. Like in the United States, we have U.S. government bonds. So you would have to offer as collateral, as a bank, U.S. government bonds, and then the Federal Reserve would loan you this money for 2 weeks. And you would, if I needed more cash as a bank, right? So it's like the ATM for the bank. Right? They would go to the Federal Reserve and they say, hey, my customers keep asking me for more cash. I need to get them more cash. Give me more cash. And the central bank would say, sure, give us collateral, and we'll give you the cash. And the way that it would mechanically work to increase the money supply is that it would be an agreement to, I'll give you the collateral for 2 weeks period of time, and then you give me the cash back, but you give me less cash back than I originally gave you. Maybe I can.
Okay. So the central bank will like lost, because that lost 2 million after that, because it is a 1 2.
So it's a question like whether it lost it or I mean it increased the money supply. I mean it increased this. Yeah. No, I think maybe we can come back to that later. I think because they're going to earn income while they hold it, and it's not really. Let me just I want to double check. I'm not sure if there's if I do a spontaneous, quick balance sheet explanation, I'm likely to miss out a detail. And end up doing more confusing than not. But I'll make a note to myself, and I'll come back maybe tomorrow. But in any case, you saw that this extended. That was one of the reasons why unconventional monetary policy was also called long-term repurchase agreements. So we would give central banks would give financial institutions a loan for a longer period of time, not 2 weeks, maybe 2 months, or maybe a year, to give them security. Right. So the question was during the financial crisis: is this bank solvent, or is this bank just illiquid? What's going on? And we can give maybe more support to these banks if they have a year of credit, right? That accesses liquidity for a year. So it's not a short-term operation, right? And then also maybe not just U.S. securities, but buying other things, government bonds, or maybe state bonds, or maybe buying mortgage-backed securities. Like in the European case, we wanted to buy just government bonds of a particular rating, but during the financial crisis, some countries' ratings, like Greece, fell below the threshold. So technically, the Greek bonds wouldn't qualify to be used in these agreements, but Greece was a member of the euro. How can their government bonds not qualify? So, we have to essentially loosen the regulations, right, and let their bonds and might be accepted for open market operations. All right, so you can think that here, if you take a step away from the repurchase agreements, I'll come back to that. Just think of this outright behavior as probably the easiest way to see it. So the government, the central bank, prints new money and buys bonds on the market. This means there's more money in the markets than before. For the bank's balance sheet, the central bank's balance sheet, they've increased their liabilities by creating this cash, but they've increased their assets by buying the bonds. So what it should do is it should just lengthen the central bank's balance sheet. Right? And a lot of the money supply, the unconventional monetary policy that you've seen in since the financial crisis has done exactly that. So here, this is the total assets. So it's the asset side of the Federal Reserve, of the federal, and the entire Federal Reserve System. Right, and so you see like a number up until the financial crisis. Right, it's 850,000 million. So 800 billion US dollars. And the financial crisis hit, right? And this more than doubled, right? Over to 2 trillion. Right? It continued to increase, right? It sort of stabilized and started to reduce the size, and then COVID hit. Right? As we see now, the length of the balance sheet is about, right, is essentially 10 times what it was before the financial crisis. So the asset side, and hence also the liability side, not just cash, there's also excess reserves and other liabilities in central bank accounts. But in essence, if we determine this very broadly, the liabilities being some form of liquidity that central bank is liable for has increased tenfold since before the financial crisis. And if you know, this is a data bank provided and run by the Federal Reserve. It's a very useful tool if you haven't, if you don't know anything in macroeconomics, like a thesis and the like. This is a very good data resource to have. They have lots of, I don't know, the global stuff. Let's see. Influence from, we have they can do some things here that make really easy. Annual frequency, I want to do percent change from a year ago, so that I didn't have another growth. And then, there we go. We've got growth rates here, phenomenal growth rates, 5–10%. There we go. But so it's as you saw here, the amount of data they have for us now is rather limited. But what's nice about this, that's the other thing. That's that. The reason why this is so cool, you can do. Changing your current US dollars, so we have real growth. I want to see. So, it's really good at bringing data together and stuff. They've got lots and lots of resources and details. Specifically, the American economy is useful to study simply because there's a lot of history and data and continuity there. And there's a lot of just free and very well-maintained access here. Right? So, we've got GDP growth for Vietnam, certainly on average much higher than the United States. Anyway, okay, so we have change in the money supply. Well, we saw that before. That's going to cause the nominal interest rate to go down. Right, to get people to be willing to hold this extra liquidity, it's going to have to be less costly for them to do so. Right, the alternative of not holding the cash and investing in resources has to be less attractive, right? And that's going to be caused or brought about by lowering the nominal interest rate. Right, so this gives us then like two different perspectives. We can think of the central bank as increasing the money supply to be engaged in expansionary monetary policy, or lowering the nominal interest rate. And we'll see here, right here that this picture starts to get a little bit better. So, what happens if we have a shock to money demand? If the central bank controls the money supply as its instrument, right, and doesn't respond, then we'll see an increase in money demand, a shock to money demand, can lead to a large increase in nominal interest rates. If the central bank as its policy instrument sets the nominal interest rate, then a shock to money demand will then bring about a change in the money supply. Right? You can think about the central bank has lots of cash. It's probably sitting in vaults that belong to the People's Bank of Vietnam, right? And Hanoi, Ho Chi Minh City, and probably Da Nang and some other places. This cash, when it's sitting in the government vault, it's not money. It's not money in circulation, right? But the government, if its policy is to keep an interest rate, then as banks, as individuals, as companies demand less or more cash, the central bank can provide that to them, right, in order to keep an interest rate constant. And now the question is, if you're a business, right, or an individual and you want to buy a new cell phone, you could maybe take out a loan, right, borrow credit, pay on payments. Does anyone have do you know any interest rate like that you might deal with on a daily basis that you've heard of? What's an interest rate that you might pay for a good, or that you might earn on a deposit or on an investment? You don't have to say it out loud, but does anyone do you have an idea what the interest rate might be? Like an interest rate, like 5% interest rate, or 7%, or 12%, or 3%? 5%. Yeah. So you have a feeling. You have the knowledge, right? So 5%, right? Okay. What's the money supply in Vietnam? Do you know what the money is? Is it a trillion yuan? 10 trillion? 100 trillion? A trillion? Do you have any idea, any knowledge what this number is going to be?
There's no sources about that. They would never.
You might be able to look at if you look at something, the point, even in countries where there are sources, in the United States there's a free source, you can find out what the money supply is, but it doesn't matter. That's the point here, is that for you, the interest rate is what matters for your daily decisions.
Yeah.
When the interest rate goes up, you understand that that's going to make borrowing money to buy things more expensive. That affects you directly. The money supply, being larger or smaller, doesn't affect you directly. It affects you if it changes the interest rate. Right? But what central banks realized in the 1980s, particularly when we started to see lots of shocks to money demand that we couldn't explain, right? It was unstable that we were having then, this is causing lots of shocks to the nominal interest rate. And that if we look at a situation we have shocks that are going up and down with our money demand, right? If we have a money supply, right? If we control monetary policy by controlling the money supply, we're going to have interest rates fluctuating around this high band. They're going to be higher and lower from one day to the next. Interest rate uncertainty, right? There's risk, volatility involved in something that we do with our daily lives. If we have central bank controlling or running monetary policy by setting the interest rate, well, this causes the money supply to fluctuate, high and low, but this isn't directly relevant for people's decision making. No? It's much more useful for an economy to have a dependable, predictable, constant interest rate from a day-to-day basis than a dependable, predictable, constant money circulation number. Because no one knows what this is, no one cares what this is directly. Yeah? If I told you the circulation, right, you know, I mean, that's a good question. Let's see if we can't find this number. Let's see. So see the Asian development is right, but they have we have 1.45 billion. Right, so it's a million billion, 1.4 million billion won in circulation. Okay. That means nothing, right? It's just a big number, right? But it doesn't mean 5% interest rate, 7% interest rate, 10% interest rate. That means something to you. Right? That means something to firms. Right? So, right, we found that most central banks, except in the financial crisis, and we'll talk about that, looked at controlling the money supply indirectly. They engage in monetary policy by changes in the policy. Now, why did money demand start fluctuating a lot? In the 1980s, people started to have access to other forms of liquidity. Instead of just cash, people were using more things like credit cards and checks and the like. There was a wide variety, so this money demand became a lot, in terms of cash demand, that affected the central bank, was a lot less predictable. Now think about today, from day to day, we have movements between Bitcoin, Apple Pay, who knows what sort of different, like WePay from China, or there's like tons of different ways to conduct transactions. Currency, dong is I don't know, maybe 2 years ago you had to pay with dong at the canteen. Now there's a an app. You don't need to have cash. You don't need dong that's going to be a drop in our money demand. That's a negative shock to our money demand. But so this has become very less predictable as we've become more digital. All the more reasons. Okay, so now what's the intuition like in terms of terminology? When we talk about expansionary monetary policy, we talk about, so it's expansionary monetary policy because we're expanding the money supply, increasing the money supply. Right? We're buying securities, right? Bringing more cash on the markets, which leads to an interest rate reduction. Right? So expansionary monetary policy, increase the money supply, decrease nominal interest rates. And contractionary, just the other way around. Right? This is going to work if we look at really short maturities. The central bank can control that more directly. Interest rates and the longer term securities are less determined by current policy of the central bank. Think of the financial crisis. We started to look at unconventional monetary policy tools, and there we started to target longer term interest rates. The central bank started to either directly do that, buy securities of longer maturities, or make promises. The interest rate we've lowered, and we're going to keep it low for the next 12 months. That's trying to say something not just about the current I, but I over the next 12 months. Right, and here, this is mostly it's right over the crisis. We have the ECB's monetary policy interest rate, and we have a 10-year bond. Right, and they move kind of together, but there's a right, not one for one, not in lockstep. And we have you can think of this like it's called the yield curve, the term structure of interest rates. If we look at the we'll come back to this in a couple of weeks. So maturity. And if we look at the maturity annualized, we might have a flat yield curve. Yield curve, this is telling us that maybe it's a 3-month, 1 year, 10 year, like they all have the same annualized maturity. This is telling us something about what we believe short-run interest rates to be will be doing over the next year and 10 years, right? And this would be a situation where we think interest rates, short-term interest rates are going to be constant, roughly constant. If we see a yield curve that looks like this, we have a upward sloping yield curve. And much more rare, and this tells us a lot of the economy, if we have what's then called an inverse yield curve. Right, this tells us that interest rates for higher maturities are higher than for shorter maturities, which one reason might be, it's riskier to lock your money down for 10 years. So in general, you'd expect to be compensated for this risk. And we'll think about this in a couple of days. Right? So maybe there's just some natural push for this to be upward sloping. But if we forget about that until for now, this is just telling us that we think that sometime during the next 10 years, we expect interest rates to be to go up. Right? Maybe we have, I don't know, let's think, 2 years. 5 years. If we have a yield curve that looks this is now telling us that we think, or the market prices or believes, that there's going to be an increase in interest rates over the next 2 to 5 years. So this reveals what financial markets think about the future. Do financial markets know the future? No, of course not. They don't have crystal balls. But if they make a wrong prediction, they lose a lot of money. No? If they make the right prediction, they make a lot of money. And what's the one thing the financial markets want to do? Make a lot of money. Right? Their whole point is to be, to make good forecasts with these sorts of predictions. Here, this would tell us that the interest rates are expected to go down. And so you could think, maybe a situation like this. If I want to buy something, right, and I'm going to take out a loan to do it, maybe I should wait just 2 years. Right? So wait 2 years, markets think I'm going to lower interest rate. Is essentially what that's telling us. Why might the interest rates be lower in the future? Well, maybe we think the central bank is going to lower the interest rates in a couple of years, increase the money supply. There might be reason for them to do that, and we're going to think about the consequences of monetary policy and why they might do that. And so you can sort of see, we saw up until, so look around 2008, the short run term interest rate was here, and the 10-year interest rate was lower. It's an inverse yield curve. It's just 2 points, but markets saw long-term interest rates falling below where they were there. Yeah? Markets saw this decrease here coming in advance. Maybe not 100%, right? Maybe not the exact timing. It's hard to tickle that out from here. Whether they really saw that there was a financial crisis, I doubt it, particularly not in this particular instrument, but you could see there was some sense here that they saw interest rates are going to be lowered. They saw this coming here. Now they obviously made some mistakes, right? Well, maybe it's 10 years ago, out that far, but they saw interest rates going up, and interest rates 10 years on out hadn't gone right. But here they were predicting an increase in interest rates that then didn't happen. So it's not perfect, obviously, but there's some sense here you could see there's some evidence that financial markets saw the interest rate decrease coming. It came with the financial crisis. All right, so interest rate is going to be determined by money demand and money supply coming together. The central bank can influence or direct this interest rate by changing the money supply. It's going to change the money supply by buying or entering into repurchase agreements of securities. If we buy these securities, this increases the money supply, decreases the interest rate. Okay, so the interest rate we can think of as being, it's determined by money supply being in equilibrium. So money supply and demand coming together. All right. It depends on, we can now reinterpret this transaction component. We can now look at our the real money supply is equal to real income, and this affects liquidity preference. It depends on the nominal interest rate. And so real GDP and nominal GDP are related by the price level, the GDP deflator. Right, so again, that's always the measuring these things is somewhat difficult. Why? I mean, so let's count up. It's a fundamental point. I'm sure you've done this before, but think of let's look at 2020. say our Y. Y was, what was our quantity? What did we produce? Let's say we produced 10 kilograms of rice. How much does a kilogram of rice cost? 20,000? 20,000 dollars. And, alright, so, alright, so this would be then, kilogram. So we produce then 20,000 per kilogram, yeah?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
That's
a
average
good
price.
average price, yeah, okay. Then, so this would be, that would be our nominal income. All right, now, let's, let's say we now, I'm going to change the number. Let's say the number was only 10,000 5 years ago. Now it's 20,000. 5 years ago it was only 10,000. Okay? Let's say we now produce 8 kilograms of rice and I don't know, 2 kilograms of beef. The price would be kilogram, is a kilogram, what would a kilogram of beef cost?
100.
Would be 100? Okay, so that's 200. So in nominal terms, right, our economy is more than 3 times larger than it was before. Right? But in real terms, have we grown? Right, on the one hand, right, the price of rice though, so if we're just looking at price, if we're just looking at rice, let's just look at our rice economy. Just look at our rice economy. Right here, 160,000 BND. Right, so in nominal terms, our economy has grown, but in real terms, we're producing less rice than before. It's just the rice has gotten more expensive. So I mean, in real terms, we've actually shrunk. Our economy is smaller. We're only producing 8 where before we're producing 10. Right? Okay, now in this flow case here, I don't even know where to begin with. Right? How do we compare? We have less rice, but we now have beef. We didn't even have beef before. We have new variety. Right? It's almost impossible to compare these. We can still compare the money, but that's very easy. You know, one thing we could do maybe is, maybe what was the price in 2025? Beef cost 1 kilogram of beef is apparently 5 kilograms of rice. If we assume the same in 2020, okay? Right, then 2020, we had 8 kilograms of rice plus 2 kilograms of rice. 8 plus 2 is equal to 10. Or, right, this is 2/5 of a kilogram of beef. Now we've made it more comparable. We brought this to a common denominator, right? We produce now, in 2025, we're producing more, under the assumption that we have the same price in 2020. We can look at that and see some relative. Right, so now we've got some comparison. We could have in 2020 sold 2 of our kilograms of rice, right? But we wouldn't have gotten the same amount of goods then in the end in 2025 as we did now. Okay, this sort of like gives you hope that you can maybe, make things comparable across time, even in a economy like this. But how many goods does Vietnam produce? Like 5 million probably? How many different goods do you consume? Like 2 or 3,000? How are you going to do this sort of calculation? It's very, very difficult. So what we do, right, we would tend to work with nominal GDP, and we would come up with, we can maybe make a measure of, let's say, a basket of goods. Let's try maybe a basket that is, I'll make it simple. A basket goods is 4 kilograms of rice and 1 kilogram of beef. And so that would be, so one basket would have a price here of 200,000 BDN in 2025. And we assumed, if we keep that same assumption, right, then we have 40,000 plus 50,000, so 90,000, okay, D and D, I was going to D and D and 20. Is that right? Yeah. Right, so now using this, we could have 100 over 90. That could be our base level here. We'd have baskets, and here we would have then 360 over 200 baskets. Right, and I'm not going to do the calculation off the top of my head, but this is bigger than this. Right, so according to this measure with this sort of like constant goods basket, then we can measure that we've seen real growth. Right now, the levels of growth, the growth rates are going to be different based on this route than this route. And this also assumes a constant basket. We think the basket should represent what the average consumer has, right? So, let's compare. Looks like everybody has a cell phone here, and everybody has a computer, right? So that's a standard basket of goods. We want to compare growth across time. How many? Was that the basket of goods that your parents had when they were your age? Did they have cell phones and laptops? No. How does that comparison is difficult, right? The basket has changed over time, right? So this makes us then. So what do? We try to have a basket that's changing over time, representing average consumption at the time, right? But let's pretend there's no growth. So we had a per capita GDP in Vietnam that was one basket of the representative good in 1970, and now today we have one basket of the representative good. So that would mean no growth. But the baskets have changed, right? Which would you rather have? The average basket of today's Vietnamese goods or the average basket of goods from Vietnam from 1970? I'm gonna go with today's goods because I get a cell phone and a laptop, right? So these measures, things of quality changes and improvements, it's always very difficult, right? In our models, I'm gonna jump over this, but when you use terms as P, here I at least said this is called the GDP deflator. It's going to be a term that's working with sort of baskets to keep price levels across time, but it's not clear that that's the only way to do things, and these baskets are changing themselves over time. So measuring these things, even not just I guess a long story, even just getting the data and measuring something as fundamental as GDP is not trivial. All right, so now for the LM curve, right? We already had it. Let's ask what happens if income increases and the money supply stays constant. Well, right, we have more transactions that we need to cover, which means we need to incentivize those people that have extra cash lying around to provide this cash, right, to people that want to engage in transactions. Right? So if we offer them a higher interest rate, right, they'll give this money to the bank, right, they'll buy bonds, right, giving people cash that then need cash to cover these transactions. So Y goes up, I goes up. Remember we had the IS curve depicted in the IY dimension. Here we have an increase in Y goes together with an increase in I. Right? This now that's math is increase in I that comes from an increase in Y. Map that over the I, Y dimension. And now we have our LM curve. All right, so we're going to be at an equilibrium, right, with a higher level of transactions. Right, we end up at point A prime. All the points along the LM curve are points of equilibrium in our money market for different levels of income. That then generate the different levels of interest rates necessary to clear the money financial markets at a given money supply. So this upward sloping is simply capturing the fact that with transaction demand, money is going to increase as we have an increase in Y. So with rise of income, the interest rate must rise so we can free up idle money for people who need to cover these increases in transactions. So we can do steps on how we get the adjustments and to always be in equilibrium, an increase in Y with an increase in transactions, which means at the given money supply and the given interest rate, we have an excess demand for money. We need more money to cover these transactions. You can think of people then, what do? They're going to sell their securities. They're going to sell the bonds that they have to get cash from people who have cash lying around. Cover these transactions. Right? If it's not just one person selling the securities, it's a lot of people selling the securities. Right? So if a lot of people are selling at the same time, that's going to tend to drive the price down. And the price of the security is inversely related to the interest rate. We're going to come back to that later, and we'll see that later if you haven't seen that in the finance course. All right, so that's our adjustment outside of equilibrium. This is what's going to ensure that we're always going to be at on the LM curve. Right, from point A, with excess supply of money, that would be money supply is above what we're demanding of that interest rate, right? And that's going to cause interest rates to fall. Right? People are going to try to get rid of their money. We're going to be buying securities. That's going to drive the price of these securities up, or push the interest rates, the inverse of that, down. All right. I'm only going to do this one once, I think, because this gets a little confusing. When you go through this adjustment step by step, right? What happens if we shift? Oh no, this one's easy. We're fine here. We're fine. We're just going to look at two different points, A and B. Right, for the two different points, A and B, are for two different money demand curves, with Y and with the higher Y. Right? So from A, we get point here, B associated with the higher interest rate and higher Y. That's how we got this upward sloping LM curve. And now, if we shift the money supply out, if we start at point B, right, so if we're on this higher money demand curve, we're going to shift down to point B prime. And if we're on the lower money demand curve, we're going to shift down to point A prime. In both cases, we're going to move from B down to B prime and A down to A prime. Connect these 2 points, we have our new LM curve, which is how you can see that a change in the money supply in the I-Y dimension causes a shift here in the LM curve. It shifts it out. Oh my God, too many lines, this is confusing, right? How can we see this without confusing ourselves? We just want to ask what happens if we increase the money supply on the LM curve. Okay? So I look here, I see I see Y, I don't see M. So I know that if I'm changing M, I'm not moving along the curve, I have to be shifting the curve. Okay? If I start at point A and the interest rate goes up, well then I know output must go up, right? I'm changing one of these two variables, so to find the answer, I just move along the existing curve and determine what happens to the other variable. But I'm not asking what happens if I change I, or what happens if I change Y. I'm asking if I change something else. In this case, M, the money supply. So we can't be moving along one of these the curves because we're not changing one of the two variables on these curves. We have to be shifting the curve. And now all we have to do is figure out, are we shifting the LM curve to the right or to the left? So if M goes up, increase in the money supply, interest rate falls. If M goes up, I falls down. That's expansionary monetary policy. All right, so if we increase M, so we hold everything constant, in particular Y, we know that increasing M means that I must go down. So we must be on an LM curve that's below the current LM curve. We're shifting the LM curve down and to the right. Done. Yeah? All right, you can trace it out bit by bit, or you can do that logic. Okay, let's think, again, we're going to come back, central banks, why they do this and how they do this mechanically, control the money supply via the interest rate. Right, if we think that the LM curve is an interest rate rule, then if we have the money supply constant with income increasing and interest rates rise, right? This would give us the familiar LM curve, right? Or you can think of maybe the central bank directly increasing the interest rate with rising income. And this would give us a familiar upward sloping LM curve. If we think of perhaps like the picture that I drew there, the central bank holds the interest rate constant, right? So what would that mean? That means that if we have an increase in output, an increase in transaction demand, in order to keep the interest rate constant, the central bank has to accommodate this money demand shock. It has to provide the market, provide all of us with exactly the money that we're demanding, the additional money that we need for the additional transactions. And if it increases the money supply, one for one with this increase in transaction demands, right, it's going to leave the interest rate unchanged. So that tells us, in other words, right, if we keep everything else the same, our money demand function is shifted out, and if we increase it tells us how much the money supply has to increase in order to maintain this interest rate policy. In other words, this tells us how much more money we're demanding, right? We need to buy 100 more motorbikes at X million dong. That's telling us the total amount of dong additional liquidity we need. Right, so that would be the alternative interest rate rule. This is done in M versus I. Right? And that would be here is connecting A and D. And that translates then in the ISLM space as a flat LM curve. Okay. Right now we can think about maybe not keeping the money supply constant, and maybe not keeping the nominal interest rate constant, but something in between. Right? That would be this LM like double prime, where there's maybe partial accommodation, or maybe the central bank responds directly to the output. Right? So maybe if we see the economy growing too quickly, the central bank would like to raise interest rates to try and slow the economy down. If the economy is going into a recession, it would like to lower the interest rate to help boost the economy. Right? So this would be a case where it doesn't hold the interest rate constant, but maybe it doesn't hold the money supply constant, but does something in between. Right? And we could map out a space here, so keep the money supply constant. We're moving to these two different money demands, would give us from A to B. A to B. If we hold interest rate constant, that would be this point A to D. And if we increase the money supply, but not all the way with the economy would demand, we'd only be partially accommodating the money demand shock, and this would give us an LM curve that's upward sloping still, but not as steep as the original one. Right? So you can think. Right, we could choose a flat LM curve, we could choose the standard LM curve, or with any partial amount of partial accommodation, you could choose the LM curve in between. Right? All right, well, let's put ISLM together now. All right. LM was the upward sloping locus of equilibrium on financial markets, so pairs of output, income, real transaction demand, and interest rates that left money demand and money supply in equilibrium. And the IS curve was a downward sloping curve. Right? The points along these curves are loci, they're called a locus of points, combination of Y's and I's such that the goods market clears. Okay, how can both goods markets and financial markets jointly be in equilibrium? We just got to bring those two curves together. And there's one point here, and that's A. Okay. Right. Now we want to look through some policy measures. In particular, let's think again about fiscal policy. We thought like the big motivator, like the magic wand for governments would be this government spending multiplier. We saw that automatic stabilizers with taxes, right, could reduce the size of the multiplier. Now we want to see what the effect is of, remember, of nominal interest rates, changing perhaps investment that might enlarge or decrease the size of this multiplier. So, fiscal policy, government spending and taxes shows up in the IS relationship, does not show up in the LM relationship. So, okay, G, nope, we have I and Y here. So a change in G is going to be causing a shift in curves, and it's only going to be shifting one of these two curves, the IS curve. All right. Same thing with taxes. Right, so we can think of expansionary fiscal policy would be increasing the budget deficit. So that's an increase in G, a decrease in T, or a combination of the two. Contractionary fiscal policy would be decreasing in G and increasing in T, or a combination. Now, which of these two do you think is easier for politicians? Which gets them the most support from the people? When the government says, you know what, the government's going to do less for you and for the country, and we're going to ask for more taxes from you. Right? Do people like that? No, not really. That's hard to sell. That's a very, contractionary fiscal policy is politically very difficult. There are many times when it might be necessary, but you know right off the bat, contractionary fiscal policy is very difficult. Expansionary is much easier, right? The government's going to do more for you, and we're going to ask less from you. I love my government. Yeah? It does more for me and asks for less in return. I'm not sure, I can't comment on the political situation here, but what I can say in Germany and in the United States now, there's a lot of efforts to talk about deficits are getting too big, maybe we need to be more careful, maybe do something like contractionary fiscal policy, but politicians they're having a very hard time actually doing it. They end up liking to, well, we don't want to increase taxes, so maybe we're going to increase some of G, some parts of G, decrease some parts of G, increase some T's and decrease some T's, and claim that in the end we're doing the contractionary policy. But it's not, right? If you change lots of little parts of G and little t, it's hard to see what's going on. Kind of like here, right? If we increase some things, decrease other things, it becomes a little difficult, right? Right, the U.S. government is trying to decrease G in terms of expenditures, like foreign aid, for example, has been drastically cut. Medical expenditures drastically cut. Increasing financing for the military, increasing G, increasing immigration control, increasing G, and border security, like so. It's not clear. Right? Some of these G's are going down, some of these parts of G are going up. Right? Is it contractionary? Is it expansionary? Maybe that's a wash. But taxes seem to likely be going up for the lower income part in America, and taxes are likely going down for the wealthiest Americans. Whether in total that's a contraction or expansion, hard to say. So when we start to think about this in the ISLM, it's going to become difficult because we don't have any mechanism here to talk about different components of G. There might be some G's some parts of government expenditures that are maybe have a larger multiplier because they increase productive capacity, right? Maybe building a better telecommunications system, or building a new highway might increase production in a country. Right? Building a new aircraft carrier is not going to make America more productive. Right? It's a big chunk of metal that floats out in the ocean. Right? You can't do anything with that in terms of production. There are distributional effects. Increasing taxes if we increase taxes on the poor, but decrease taxes on the wealthy, you might have, human nature says this is unfair, right? But it's not clear what's the total effect on output. Is it going to be larger or smaller? Right? We can start to think about that, and we'll do that just for a second because I think it's really important. This is why the micro foundation that we want to get at later is even more important. But this little, all the way at the back here, we actually answered this question already. So we were talking about the marginal propensity to consume, right? And we know is C1, right? That was the key for this government expenditure multiplier. Right? And we saw that if C1 is really low, remember Elon Musk sees $500,000 on the street, he picks it up, puts it in his pocket, and forgets about it. His consumption doesn't change. His C1 is almost zero, perhaps. And that led to a government expenditure multiplier, right? That was essentially 1 over 1 minus C1. If C1 is 0, that's exactly equal to 1. Now, some people might consume half of this. Right? So then C1 would be equal to 0.5. Okay? 1 over 1 minus 0.5 is 2. Right? So the government multiplier is going to be 2. Any change in fiscal policy is going to have double the effect on output for those people. Now imagine someone who's very, very poor, who's starving, and they find $500,000 on the ground. What are they going to do? They're going to eat. They're probably going to spend it all. That C1 is going to be almost equal to 1. Remember, when C1 is equal to 0.9, the multiplier was 10. So, if we reduce taxes for the wealthy people, for Elon Musk, we reduce his consumption behavior isn't going to change at all. Right? Consumption from the wealthy won't go up. If we decrease taxes for the very poorest in our society, they have the highest marginal propensities to consume. They're going to have a very large increase in consumption. That's going to lead to a very large increase in demand. So now, let's cut taxes for the rich people. Their consumption doesn't go up. And let's increase taxes for the poorest people. That means their consumption goes down. So the total effect is consumption goes down, demand goes down. Right? This redistributional policy is likely to reduce demand and reduce production from this perspective. Okay, now let's go into working through the actual examples we had here. I had to go way back. Okay. So let's look, if we just increase taxes, if we just look at the IS curve in isolation, right? The increase in taxes is going to reduce demand for goods. Output is going to go from Y to Y bar. Right? We can also think of this in reverse terms. If we started with G and increased G, we would go from Y prime to Y. This would be the movement from this point to this point is the entire government multiplier that we're looking at from before. Now let's bring in the IS equation. So now we don't move from this A here all the way down here, right? We don't move horizontally, we move along the LM curve. Why? As output starts to decrease, our transaction needs decreases. We demand less cash, less money. Our money holdings are going down. No? And so we're shifting as an economy our holdings away from cash towards bonds, driving up the price of bonds, right? Or decreasing the nominal interest rate. I wasn't here. So I will definitely do that now. And so I want to look at the effects of an increase in government expenditures. Parallel. Right, we were just looking at the goods market from before. This government expenditure multiplier effect gave us maybe we had, this is the increase in government expenditures is this much, and the total effect on output was larger. Here almost twice as large, so it would be like the marginal propensity to consume of 0.5. The LM curve tells us, well, wait a second. As our construction workers who are building the streets get more cash, and the asphalt factory owners, right, who are making the asphalt to put on the streets have higher income, they're going to demand more goods, which means they want to purchase more goods, which means there are more transactions that they need to conduct. They need more money, right? They're going to get this cash that's otherwise laying around unused in people's bank accounts and the like, right? So they're going to bid up the nominal interest rate, or they're going to sell the bonds that they have to get cash, lowering the price of bonds, so driving the nominal interest rate up. And what does this do? Well, what happens as the nominal interest rate goes up? Investment, remember? Investment, dependent on the nominal interest rate. The interest rate, is that, not that meant, right, my laser pointer was no longer a project that was worthwhile, right? Or the financing costs for the new factory have gone up. Investment's going to go down. Investment is a component of demand, and we see that now, if we include the effects of the nominal interest rate, the effects on investment, then this magic wand of the government is less powerful. Another way we can think of this is, we can think of this as government crowding out. Why? The government is increasing its expenditures. How is it financing this? So we have to raise taxes, right? That would then we have to do another shift. Where is this increase in G coming from? The government has to borrow it from markets. So the resources that the factories could borrow to build a new factory, the companies could borrow to build a new office building, they're not available. The government has crowded them out of the market. The government is borrowing these resources. Right? So there's less higher and higher round effects that can, or they're smaller, right? They can unfurl themselves and manifest themselves because the government is crowding out the markets in every one of these steps. These additional like here, investment ends up being smaller because the government, through this increase in expenditures, is extracting resources from the market to cover that. That's a good stopping point. We will come back to monetary policy, put them together, talk about the interest rate, and bring things to a close after a 10-minute break. Yeah?